So in this session, we're going to turn our attention to two of the apostolic priorities in turn. And the first of these is implementing integral ecology. And it echoes Pope Francis' vision of the interconnectedness of all things in the world through Laudate Si and Fratelli Tutti. Someone who lives and breathes this vision of interconnectedness is our own Bishop Tim Norton. Bishop Tim was ordained as Auxiliary Bishop for the Archdiocese of Brisbane in February 2022. He's a divine word missionary and he's brought great energy to our Archdiocese, particularly in the areas of inclusion, interculturality and reconciliation. So please make Bishop Tim feel very welcome.
Good morning, everyone. We might start with the slides if that's okay. I think Amy's there somewhere. There it is. So this morning I will be talking with you with reference to two of Archbishop Mark's priorities. And to talk a little around culture and around mission and around nature, those three things. So Amy, could we move on there? Thank you. So you've heard Archbishop Mark speak about these. We'll go to this priority first, bringing cultural communities to the centre. And so he's spoken about the presence of people in this archdiocese from many different parts of the world and the life and energy that they actually bring to the archdiocese, the life and energy of the spirit that they bring to this archdiocese. So I've been away for some years. Coming back to Australia, it's even more multicultural than ever, which is something I'm very happy about. And seeing the basic ethnicity, the different ethnicities that we have within the Archdiocese gives me a great deal of joy. So Archbishop Mark talks about bringing these groups, these different cultural groups, to the centre. But indeed, for me, what's in the centre and what's on the periphery, I think there needs to be a lot of movement between the two. He also speaks about this involving significant change for the whole Archdiocese in this part of the world. So we're talking about culture. Thanks, Amy. Next slide, please. A little information around the Catholic population in Australia at this time. This particular research has come out only last month, so it's very current. And so we're looking at 21% of Australian Catholics were born in a non-English speaking country. And a similar percentage who do not speak English at home, they speak another language. And you'll see from the statistics that this is only increasing. And indeed, the Catholic population in this area of diversity is reflecting the population as a whole across the country. Amy, thank you. Which gives us to ask the question, so what's culture? What does culture actually mean? We all come with our own cultures. So what does culture mean? Amy? Thanks, Amy. So it's a commonly held belief that actually only some groups of people have culture. There are some groups of people that don't have culture at all. Well, that is a basic error. Every people, every nation has its own culture, and they're all unique. And the job of culture for all of us is to help us with these really basic human and spiritual needs, to help us find meaning, identity, and order. Those three things for all of us. And we all assume that our first culture, whatever that is actually the best way to live. We all think that quietly, mostly quietly. And so my culture is actually the best culture. But thinking about culture in today's world, we think of something that's much more fluid. We think of something that brings unity in diversity. And we would say that all cultures indeed are a legitimate way to live in the world. And so we are moving towards this idea of giving people space for their culture, to express their cultural group. And that's all very fine. But the question for us is, how does the expression of different cultures around us impact on us from wherever we are from? And we would say that there's no culture in the world that is actually better than any other culture. Even though, going back to that ethnocentric me, I think that mine is just a little bit better than any other. But we wouldn't speak about culture only in terms of ethnicity or nationality. We could speak about it in terms of gender. We could speak about it in terms of social class. We could speak about it in terms of personality. And all cultures bring their own worldview to the world. Mine included, yours included. Now we are going somewhere with this. Stay with me, stay with me. So culture and context are extremely important. Our social location, which means what class we're from, what group. So I grew up in Sydney, in a street, and almost everybody was Anglo-Australian, all the families, Anglo or Euro-Australian, except for one family across the street, who was a family of Lebanese Catholic migrants. And that family sent their children to the schools that my brother and my sister also went to, Catholic schools. And more than once, so the boys were more my brother's age, more than once, 4 years between me and my brother, so I was much smaller in the schoolyard, I saw my brother stand between other boys and my two neighbours from Lebanon to sort of stop the taunts and the teasing that was coming their way. Why do we do this to a minority? We do it all the time. I was proud of my brother to see that. He doesn't even remember it. I remember it. And so there are also elements of culture. Many of us come from cultures that are communal in nature. Others of us, like me, come from cultures that are more individualistic. One is not better than the other. In fact, the culture I come from was more communal in a past time, but has become more individualistic in the present time. Again, one is not better than the other. We often bring moral judgments to this. Let's try not to do that today. What we are aiming for are cultures that are intercultural, not just multicultural. Multicultural means the presence of people from different cultures. Intercultural communities do this: value, equality, mutuality, respect, and freedom. And working towards communities of people who share some level of trust. So this is across cultures. So this is the difference between intercultural communities and multicultural communities. Again, multicultural communities, groups of people from different places who exist well together and sometimes share food. But basically, in multicultural communities, people will seek people from their first culture to be the ones they share most time with. If I ask you, who are the people that you have your most intimate and close relationships with, almost all of you will find, as do I, that those people come from my first culture. It's quite normal. Again, that ethnocentric me seeks out people who are like me to have deeper relationship with. In intercultural communities, intentionally we try to step beyond what is our first culture into spaces that we share with people from other cultural groups. It's not natural. As Anthony Gittins might say, it's supernatural. Anthony Gittins, a Spiritan priest who has written a lot in this area, who actually died just a few days ago. We are all born into a culture. We all come from a place and a space in the world. We are all born into a first culture, and we learned about our first culture from the people that surrounded us. And the people that surrounded us help us know who we are in the world as people who belong to a particular culture, in a particular time, in a particular place. And then we go on to teach that to others who are from the same cultural group. So is there a perfect culture? No. As Christian people, we would say that all of us are made in the image of God, but all of us require conversion due to limitation, due to weakness, and not just personal, but also cultural. Probably one of the best things we can do as we try to move towards being intercultural communities is develop the skill of taking a critical look back at our first culture. Our first culture has many lights, many wonderful things, but all of our first cultures also have shadows. And if we can actually think a little more deeply about that, so that in our interactions with other cultures, we bring our lights and our shadows. We bring both. And we find those things also in other cultural groups. Somebody who grew up in a particular culture, in a particular time, was Jesus himself. And so this is from the prologue of John's Gospel. So I belong to the Society of the Divine Word. I'm a Divine Word missionary. And this particular piece of scripture was very important to our founder, Arnold Jansen, and therefore very important for us. And so this particular verse focuses on this divine nature of the Word who took on the flesh, who took on the role of being human, just like us. And St. Paul speaks about the incarnation of Jesus. Amy, please. Thank you. In terms of kenosis, so Jesus emptying himself, taking on the nature of human people, just like us. Intercultural discipleship, if we'd like to think of ourselves of intercultural discipleship, of intercultural disciples, requires some level of sacrifice. So, in my family, my father, very good sense of humour, principally based on sarcasm. It's fairly Australian. My brother is the king of sarcasm. I learned also to have a very sarcastic sense of humour. I joined an international religious order of brothers and priests. And so when I would make jokes, often my brothers would not understand, or worse, would feel hurt by what I was saying, which was the absolute opposite of what I was trying to do. So with time, in my intercultural living, I've had to leave part of me, my sarcastic sense of humour, at the door in order to live well with my brothers from other places. So intercultural discipleship, just like any discipleship, requires some level of sacrifice on the part of us all. Again, going back to Jesus, born in a certain place in the world in a certain time. We have lots of scriptural references. He came born of a woman subject to the law, a Jewish woman, the Jewish law. So he experienced love, he experienced friendship, he liked to eat, he liked to go to celebrations. We've heard about the wedding in Cana. He liked to be in close contact with creation, the creation that his Father had given him, had given to all of us. We know that he was a carpenter's son, and he learned how to be a pious Jew, praying the prayers of his family, going to the synagogue, reading the Torah. He learned how to be a pious person. And so, if we are made in the image and likeness of God, we ask our question, really? All of us? Every single one of us in the world? Is it not more the people from my cultural group that are made in the image and likeness of God, rather than those from other cultural groups? No. Our belief is that we are all of us, made in the image and likeness of God. Back to this idea of ethnocentrism, where we see the world through our own glasses, our own lenses, and their cultural lenses. My shirt. This shirt is from Ghana. So I've been living for 8 years in Italy more recently, running the renewal courses for members of my religious order from all parts of the world. And I lived in a community of 6, the 6 of us from 6 different countries. So my brother John is from Ghana. So we have the opportunity to go home, usually every 3 years. But because of the roles we were undertaking in running regular courses, we were given the chance to go home for 4 weeks every 2 years. So every 2 years, John would go home, and John and his sister would buy shirts for the 6 of us. And John would bring back shirts every time he went home. The first time he went home, the shirt he gave me, John is a big man, big guy, big, strong Ghanaian man. And it was like a lemon gold yellow thing that I put it on one day, the first day he gave it to me, and he said, "You look great." And I went to the mirror and thought, I don't look great at all. This doesn't look... 2 years later, it was lime green, and neon blue. And again, Tim, this shirt's for you. My sister and I bought it for you, Don. So, with the first one, I felt I looked like a traffic light. And with this one, I felt like I looked like a Christmas tree. But he said I looked great. Okay. So, the next time he was going home, I approached him because my Vietnamese brother and my Indonesian brother, Trong and Isidoro, were saying, "Why you give us these shirts? We look silly in these shirts. This like colourful tent." And I said, "He's giving us those shirts because he loves us. He loves us with these shirts." I said, "He loves us." So the next time he was going home, I went to him before he went. I said, "John, you know, I really like green, dark green. And I kind of like blue, dark blue. And, you know, you and I aren't exactly the same size, so how about you get one that's a bit smaller?" So that year, he came home with this. I really like this. It's my size, and I think the colour's good for me. And I was wondering, why is it that John and his sister doesn't know us, but John knows us. Why would John buy me shirts like he bought me those first 2 times? And it occurred to me, John thinks I'm a black man. John really thinks I'm a black man. Now, he knows I'm a white man, but unconsciously, he thinks I'm a black man. Why? Because he's a black man. Which then, if I flip the coin, what do I think of John? Well, I know he's a black man, but the way I relate to him, what I say to him, how I deal with him, is from my first culture, which is as if he's a white man. He's not a white man. He's a black man from Ghana, a big, strong, proud black man. We all do this, and we do it all the time. We see the world not as it is, not we see people as they are, we see people as we are. We see people from our own point of view, our own cultural point of view. So ethnocentrism, whilst it's normal and helpful, it has helped groups of people survive through centuries, can also have a sinful side when it's exaggerated. And it can be exclusive. And we fail to recognise that we are all sons and daughters of the same God. And we not only exclude people, but we too can be victims of exclusion. And we do it regularly and all the time. A nice quote from Malachi the prophet, "Do we not all have one Father? Did not one God create us? Why do we betray one another in this way?" We move on to another one of Archbishop Mark's priorities. And I've taken just some quotes. Implementing an integral ecology. And so our own Pope, Pope Francis, speaks about this interconnectedness of the world, of all of us with one another and with the world in which we live. And the question there at the bottom that Archbishop Mark poses, how do we do this in the Archdiocese? Not in word, but in action. This again touches on the need for cultural change. Cultural change. So, here's a nice image of Pope Francis with a couple of kids playing in front of him, and you might not be able to see, but both of those children have Down syndrome. So Pope Francis argues that it's important to pay attention to cultural ecology. in order to really advance our own understanding of the world around us. But culture is more than what we've inherited from the past. It's a living, dynamic participation in the world as it is. Not as we are or as we'd like things to be, but as it is. If we can really see out into the world. So last year I launched the Archdiocesan Action Platform for the Archdiocese on Stradbroke Island with Auntie Evelyn, an Indigenous woman. And she made it very clear to me. She said, we cannot care for the world around us unless we care for the people in the world. And she was being very particular around our Aboriginal sisters and brothers, whom people from my cultural group historically have not treated well. She's right. So the reality of the disciples in those early communities, in many ways, is just like us today in our faith communities as disciples. So the unity in mission that we share comes from that same Spirit of Jesus. And that same Spirit of Jesus leads us on mission together. All together. Not this cultural group, and then that cultural group, and that cultural group. In this Archdiocese, we have this opportunity to do something really radical and be intercultural disciples for Jesus in the world, as it is, together. True intercultural community does not just happen. It has to be intentional. We have to think it through, pray it through, discern it together in order to move forward. So from Tony Pernia, who was one of the superiors general of my religious order, a Filipino man, a very decent theologian, intercultural communities must be carefully created, intentionally nurtured, and prudently cared for. And the international nature of our church in the world and in our Archdiocese is fundamentally part of who we are. We are not individual groups. We are an Archdiocese of disciples together. And so I put this image up of, it's an image of some of the clergy in our Archdiocese. More than half of the priests in our Archdiocese were born in a country other than Australia. So indeed, what's happening here, and I think this is very fine, that our priests, our deacons, are a reflection of our people. And for me, this is good, and this is right. This is challenging, but this is a good thing. If you can't see us as clergy attempting, at least attempting, not necessarily succeeding regularly, but attempting to live intercultural community, in a sense where we do develop relationships with one another, in a sense where we do try and trust one another, then what's the point? We have an absolute obligation for the people of the Archdiocese. So our challenge, to move from labelling to embracing. To grow in the consciousness of our own ethnocentrism, in the remarks we make, in the attitudes that we have. To try our best to understand, not just understand other people, but understand that they too have a history, a place in the world from which they've come. And sometimes that place is a place of great trauma, of famine, of war. We take that into account, even in our relationships with them. And let's dream together of a new world order of intercultural communities of disciples, disciples for Jesus. From Galatians. So in Christ Jesus, you're all children of God through faith. For all of you who were baptized into Christ have clothed yourselves with Christ. There's neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, nor is there male and female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. And I choose this particular image because this is us. This is us in the Archdiocese of Brisbane, intercultural disciples for Jesus. Thank you.